It's official, I think Diablo 4 is finally back. Hello you guys, it's official, I think Diablo 4 is finally back. I haven't played since Season 1 and just started dabbling in Season 3, and with the changes they're making right now, I can tell you Season 4 actually looks extremely promising and might be the big break Diablo 4 finally needs to again reclaim a decent amount of players, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. So Season 4 is bringing us a ton of new mechanic changes, a ton of new changes around the entire game and the way that it's basically kind of played, and kind of reworks of mechanics within the game that are adding a lot more depth and in-game type content to Diablo 4, which we all agree should have been in the first place. And if you're coming from playing a game like Last Epoch, where the overall feel of the game is very fluid and very actually fun to play, Diablo 4 has taken some of those mechanics directly or indirectly from Last Epoch and implemented some of that stuff within Diablo 4 itself. And I think overall it's going to make the game a lot better. I'm going to show you all the patch notes right now, and hopefully it will bring Diablo 4 back to at least some sort of standard that's not garbage. So they're offering a first public test run, kind of like they did in the beta of Diablo 4 before they released it, and it's going to offer the chance for players to test upcoming changes and features for Season 4 to see if they're really worth the hype or not. So before we get into the actual notes, you can see here that change is going to happen from the 2nd of April to the 9th, and any Diablo player is going to be able to log in and play this public test run. Now the first big change Diablo 4 is getting is a change to its itemization. Now the way this is going to work is they're shifting focus from a quantity over quality method to a quality over quantity method, meaning we're going to get much more meaningful loot and not near as much of all the garbage loot that we have to sift through constantly. That's no longer going to be the case. There's going to be a lot more quality loot that actually gives you affixes and stuff that you need, as well as overall better gear. I think we can all attest to this, going into a dungeon and getting, 20 pieces of gear that's sacred and just absolute trash for a level 100 character. And hopefully it's going to make the game much more enjoyable and rewarding to play. Now again, some of the basic item updates here, they're reducing the number of affixes. Now there will be 3 on legendary items and 2 of them on rare items. There will be a smaller pool of more potent affixes and more relevant affixes, examples like ranks of single chord skill, meaning we're going to be getting more important affixes more often on our gear than not, which is good because we get the more powerful and build like affixes that actually matter on our gear more frequently, meaning you have to go through much less gear to actually get meaningful pieces of loot. Another big itemization update is only sacred items will drop in World Tier 3 and only ancestral items will drop in World Tier 4. Thank you, Blizzard Heavens. Now, a lot of people have been very vocal about this in particular, and it makes sense because if you're in World Tier 4, you should not be getting sacred, horrible pieces that you're never going to wear in World Tier 4 when every piece of those just goes straight in the garbage. It's just an absolute waste of time. With this fix, that gear set for World Tier 3, which is sacred, when you're in World Tier 3, you're going to get it. And then once you get to World Tier 4 and go to higher level gear, you're not going to get gear that you would never wear again. So that's great. Affix values are tuned up to be punchier, and we want them to really be noticed, is what they say in the patch notes, meaning we can expect them to hopefully have a much bigger, significant impact versus just smaller little changes. So that way they actually add a bunch of value to your character overall, because who wants an affix? Who wants a bunch of affixes on a lot of your gear that we're just putting on there because they're the least worst thing you can have? You want everything to benefit your character. So hopefully you can also see the following new affixes and positioning of affixes, like the 5 shown here: resource per second, resource on kill, lucky hit, apply vulnerable, life per hit, and basic skill ranks. Now there are also some miscellaneous updates here, so that legendary items drop from enemy level 95 plus are always 925 item power, which is amazing. It makes perfect sense because once you get to a high enough enemy level, you should be getting those higher item power pieces of gear. It makes no sense to go out and defeat a level 150 enemy and get a level 60 sword. That does nothing but make us waste more time looting in our inventory, and this is a good overall change. Gems are simpler, more useful, and have a much longer crafting tail. So gems now have core stats, and the more conditional bonuses have been simplified. Salvage crafting and rewards have been tuned. This is going to be absolutely needed for the itemization update, which I think will work out pretty evenly. It significantly reduced item drop rates, so less time sorting, more time actually doing content within the game. Obviously, that's one of the biggest things we want right now. Item re-rolling gold cost capped when enchanting. Also a very good change. I think that's good in this case to not give people false hopes of getting a piece of gear and then trying to roll the affixes you need on it and just keep sucking you in for more and more gold, just hoping you're going to get it, just slowly taking all your gold and just withering it away. I think this is good to have a cap so that we know, because you all know you spent 10 or 20 million gold rolling one single affix that you needed on a piece of gear, just praying it would change, and it just never happened. Material removal and consolidation. I'm assuming this means they're going to consolidate extra materials and things that are currently in your inventory already to make a little bit more sense, sort of like they did with gems, taking them out of your inventory and adding them to the overall materials tab. Forgotten Souls can now be obtained from Whispers and are now a global rare drop from elites. I think this is a big one because, again, it just helps us to get Forgotten Souls much easier, overall making some of the grind of Diablo 4, especially the monotonous part like getting Forgotten Souls, just a little bit easier and a little bit overall more fun because it just happens while you're playing, right? Uniques are going to appear earlier now, so this is actually a decent change, and I like this because earlier on in Diablo 4, you should be able to find uniques, which can overall really help your character at the beginning of the game. Some uniques now drop starting in World Tier 1 and 2, and all uniques can now drop in World Tier 3, meaning you can get every single unique in the game in World Tier 3, and Uber uniques can start dropping from monster level 55, yes, as early as level 55, and drops at 925 item power. Now we're going to get into the really good stuff. So first, they're introducing a new crafting system that is tempering. So the new system will allow you to add affixes to your items at the blacksmith through a new reusable item that can drop from most content in game, and those are going to be called temper manuals. They're categorized similar to the Codex of Power with your affixes, and once you gain these, you actually retain them for unlimited use, meaning, again, it's not like current aspects where you have to get them and then put them on a piece of gear, and then if you want another one to replace it, you have to constantly stack all of your legendary items in your chest that you don't have enough room for because you never know when you're going to need one. So these are going to be unlimited use once they're gained. Each manual contains a handful of affixes. You're able to attach one of those affixes at a time. Affixes can be rerolled up to the item's temper reroll limit, meaning there's a certain amount of temper rerolls that you can do on a piece of gear. Similar again to Last Epoch, you can reroll until you run out of forging potential. Here you're going to be able to change that for the amount of times of temper durability that you have left. Meaning here you can see tempered affixes. This has 0 of 2, meaning that you can put 2 of these on this piece of gear, and again you can re-roll 5 times, and once you do that you run out of essentially tempering potential, and then you can no longer change them, but it allows us to add a bunch of this stuff onto our weapons to make them even better. And ancestor items can have 2 tempered affixes from different categories. Again, showing us that item that you can get 2 different tempered affixes on from either of these 2 categories. And it seems like each piece of gear you're going to be able to temper certain affixes on. But again, those ancestor items can have 2 tempered affixes from different categories. So we'll look to see how that goes, but it looks like a very interesting system. And here again, you can see just some of the tempering that has been completed for an affix that was added. And again here, plus 30% bone spirit size for necromancer only. These affixes are going to exist from a general perspective as well as, again, a class perspective to give us hopefully a pretty wide range to be able to put on our actual pieces of gear. And give us a little bit more options on the builds we want to make. There's also a huge thing that's going to happen with greater affixes. So currently we only have the regular affixes that we have on our gear, our lovely movement speed, all the great stuff, all the core stats, everything like that, right? Greater affixes are going to appear only on ancestral legendaries and unique items. These are more powerful versions of normal affixes and with a 1.5x multiplier on the affixes maximum roll. So again, like Last Epoch, this is similar to the exalted items where your affixes on this piece of gear can actually be rolled to a much higher value than they should be, and it's all kind of random, and they're only appearing on these items by finding them on the actual piece itself. So an item with a greater affix will be immediately obvious, and this item will actually have a 1 through 4 next to the item name to show how many affixes are greater. So again, this is going to be basically like a major version of the affix itself. So instead of having the movement speed as a affix that goes plus 15% to 20%, if it rolls luckily on an item like this as a greater affix, it may go from that at 15 to 20% to a higher level with a maximum of up to 30% movement speed because it's a greater affix. Now keep in mind, these are randomly found on gear. you can't actually craft these, which makes the gear even more valuable to find. And again, you can get an item with 4 greater affixes on them. It's just obviously going to be much more rare as you find them. And each affix on an item has a chance to be greater in World Tier 3 and 4, meaning the higher tier you get, the better items you're obviously going to be getting. And again, players cannot enchant into a greater affix. They can only be found on the gear. So this is a late game crafting system that you use to upgrade items using materials gathered from the pit. Now the pit itself is essentially very similar to greater rifts for the most part in Diablo 3. This is essentially a network of dungeons within North Sanctuary that's going to give a strange variety of things like ore and things that are otherwise perfect for crafting very exceptional good weapons with a lot of different items. So upon entering World Tier 4, you're going to get a priority quest to complete a Tier 46 Nightmare dungeon. Now once you complete that, you begin to unlock Rune Shard, as you can see here, during in-game activities. Then you'll need to collect enough of this Rune Shard to activate the Obelisk of Saragar. Once you activate the obelisk, it'll send you straight to the pit, and the goal here is to slay enough monsters before a 10-minute timer runs out, and each player death removes certain amounts of time from the clock. You can see here, on your first death, it removes 30 seconds, second death, 60 seconds, and your third and subsequent deaths, 90 seconds. It will remove from that timer. Now what happens with the pit itself, and the whole point is once you slay enough monsters, there's going to be a portal that will appear and it'll take you to an in-game boss's arena. Now actually killing that boss before the timer expires will grant you Masterworking materials and unlocks the next tier of the pit. And you can continue to work through these pit tiers until you reach higher and higher levels, granting you more and more Masterworking materials and making it overall more valuable, because you're going to need this stuff to make some more details here. If you kill the boss within 4 to 6 minutes, to spare, it grants you an additional tier unlock, meaning you don't have to do near as many pits to continue going up that tier ladder. And if you kill the boss with 6 or more minutes to spare, it grants you 2 additional unlocks. And what this kind of accounts for, again, great quality of life feature here, because if your character is way too strong, you don't need to do 10 pits to unlock 10 tier levels. If you're strong enough to complete it very quickly, then you get the bonus of go ahead and bumping up to the next level of pit without having to actually continue to just do them over and over. That's a great quality of life add by the devs. So I'm very much on board with changes like that, and that's what's going to make this game really good. So the pit has hundreds of tiers of difficulty, and if the mastery timer expires before you finish running through the pit, you'll still receive loot, but won't receive any masterworking materials. So again, if the timer runs out, you actually still get loot, but you don't get the good big boy masterworking stuff that you kind of are doing it for, which makes it a point of you need to make your character stronger and stronger over time to actually finish the pit and tiers in time. Otherwise, again, you don't really get much of anything in terms of at least the masterworking materials, which I'm sure is the whole point of this. Now, if you played Last Epoch, this is a very similar system to, yeah, you guessed it, monoliths. And I'm not going to say, hey, they straight up, stole it. But again, Greater Rifts was already a thing in Diablo 3. But this is going to be a great in-game add to the game to give us much more to do once we get higher level, that we don't have to just grind dungeons, and a lot of good value add here. And you can run the pit with actually groups of 4, but keep in mind when you do run it, the person that opened the pit will actually receive the lion's share of materials. And primarily that's a good thing, because what that means is because the people that are using their rune shards that they've collected to actually open the pit are obviously going to get the best rewards, because they're the ones that spent the materials to open the gate and, start running that stuff. So you spend your rune shards, you get the most rewards. It only makes sense. There are also boss ladder updates. So if you're like me and only played Season 0 and 1, you might not be familiar too much with these bosses, but the Echo Vendario joins the ladder in Season 4 PTR in the same bracket as her brother Duriel, and it's going to have the same uber unique drop rate with a mix of different attacks you can see here, and summoning parts can be acquired from Beast in Ice and Lord Zur. Tormented echoes of all ladder bosses can be summoned with stones and obtained from deep within the pit, again making it more beneficial for us to do the higher tiers of the pit and deepening the end game a little bit. You can see here the stones are needed along with increased amount of summoning materials, but you don't have to worry because they also drop more rewards as you continue. Tormented echoes will be level 200. All items dropped are item level 925. That is a big one, so we're going to be getting the max level items, obviously for beating the in-game content, which entices you to do it, right? Which makes it more fun to do if you know you can get higher level items. So some of the features they're offering for testing, and this is what I'm going to get into, how you can actually look at these changes and play them for yourself, which should be pretty fun. So they're going to have servers for this playtest realm in the largest regions. You can see all of them here. And basically it's going to carry over campaign completion, mountain skill points, fog of war, and altar of Lilith stat bonuses. So all of your normal stuff that are on your account for the most part. And as for changes that apply to the endgame, these are going to be the following features that they're actually going to offer us. As you go into the public test realm, you can instantly boost your character to level 100 by arriving at Kiova and talking to the NPC PTR boost, and it'll boost you to level 100. From here, I imagine you're going to be able to customize your character, build out a build, things like that. And you're going to get 100 million gold, 1,000 obols, 2 random sets of ancestral gear at 920 item power, upgraded potions, fully unlocked paragon glyphs, meaning you can go crazy with the paragon tree, up to 10 tempering manuals that are class specific, all the consumable materials you would need. This doesn't include certain very specific materials for later game systems that they're implementing, materials to enter the pit and nightmare dungeons, and the boost can be repeated with new characters on the PTR, and you can trade between characters as needed. The fog of war will be completely cleared on your entire map, and additionally, regardless of whether you choose to boost your character or not, your legendary drop rates will be doubled. And you can see the steps to install the PTR here, and this will actually open if we scroll back up to the top here. You can see this, and you can see this will actually open from April 2nd through April 9th again, and you should be able to take full advantage of testing all of these changes for yourself. Now, let me add a final point to this, and this is going to be a lot of the patch notes that you're going to see that's going to revolve around class-specific items. So whether you're playing a barbarian, a sorceress, doesn't matter. All of the patch notes for Season 4 are in here, and they're going to make many impactful class updates that are hopefully going to bring the classes even more in line with one another and make them all pretty viable in terms of the different builds you can do. Obviously, there's still going to be absolutely broken builds out there. That's just part of it. But for the most part, they're going to make even different kind of builds for classes much more viable, and opening up designs to be more generally useful so you can make more connections and more builds overall. For an example I can tell you from these notes, as I mentioned here, if you love Dust Devils on Barbarian, for example, but are frustrated they're not actually working, they're showing you here in the patch notes that they're going to be a real actual contender for possibly making a build with them. Overall, they're going to open up the build potential for a lot of different classes. I'm not going to go over all these changes in this video because there's an absolute ton. You can see there's a ton of different changes for unique items, different legendary aspects for giving us, again, bonuses to some of these skills for Barbarian. On top of the gear changes, there's also a lot of unique item changes and legendary aspect changes. You can see Bold Chieftains here. It's now usable by both Barbarians and Druids, so that's going to be a big one to keep in mind. There's a ton of notes here. Again, I'll leave the link to these patch notes in the description below if you want to check these out. That being said, I'm very excited for Season 4 and look very forward to playing the playtest realm and getting you guys all the info you need and seeing how awesome this game can hopefully be if they do it right. That being said, like the video if you haven't already, subscribe if you're new. Thank you guys. Peace.